Hi, I'm Paige, and this is my Perfect Fit Sweater Chat. This is great for if you are thinking about your first sweater, or if you've made several sweaters and just want to make your next sweater fit your body a little better, or feel better about the way your body feels in that sweater. So let's get started. This is a highly abridged version of a class that I teach pretty regularly, so if you are interested in a deeper discussion, shoot me a message. I'm available for Zoom classes or available to make appearances at your local yarn shop. So let's get into it. The first thing we're going to talk about is yarn substitution. So you found a sweater pattern that you love, but you don't have that yarn, or your local yarn shop doesn't carry it, or it's really expensive, or you want to work from your stash. There's lots of reasons that you wouldn't use the yarn a pattern calls for, and that's great. But there's a couple things to keep in mind when you're switching out yarns. The first is weight. So if a pattern calls for a worsted weight yarn, you should probably stick with a worsted weight yarn. Yeah, okay. That's fine. That's easy. You can also use a different weight yarn, and I do this all the time. I see a lot of patterns that call for sport weight or DK yarn, and oh, I have a bunch of fingering weight yarn in my stash, so I want to use that. Great. I have to do a little math, but that's okay. I like the way fingering weight yarn feels on my body better than I do a DK or a sport. The most important thing, I think, when picking out or when substituting yarn is fiber content. So different fibers behave differently. If a pattern is made in wool, try to use a wool or a wool blend that's going to be pretty similar fiber content wise. If you make a pattern that calls for wool out of alpaca or out of cotton or another fiber that's heavier or drapier, that sweater is going to be a dress by lunchtime, which is not really what you want if you've put a lot of work into fitting it to your body. So be wary of different fibers and different fiber characteristics when you're switching out. There are lots of different types of wools, and honestly, that can be a class on its own. Lopi is going to be very different from merino, which is very different from blue-faced Leicester. There's lots of different breeds, and they all have their uses, but they aren't always super interchangeable. So if something calls for a merino wool that you're going to want to wear next to your body, try to find something similar. If it's a harder outdoor yarn or like a jacket outerwear, try to find a wool breed that's going to be similar to the original yarn as well. Let's talk about gauge. I know, you don't want to talk about gauge, but it's really important, I promise. So you've got your yarn, you've got your pattern, and it's time to see if we're going to make the right size. So make your swatch, wash your swatch, block your swatch, and see if it's the right size. If you need to go up or down a needle size to change your gauge, then do it. But before you cast on, I want you to look at your swatch and think really hard. Do I like the fabric that I'm getting at this gauge? For me, a lot of the time, the answer is no. My gauge might be spot on, but if I don't like the thickness of the fabric, the drapiness of the fabric, anything about the fabric, I'm not gonna like that sweater. And I don't want to invest all my yarn and all my time into a sweater that I'm not gonna love every time I wear. So if you love the gauge and it works, go ahead. If you're getting gauge, but you don't really like the fabric that you're getting, that's okay. Change the math and not your gauge. We'll discuss that later. The next part is what if you were getting gauge but aren't anymore? Let's talk about a couple things that can impact your gauge while you're mid-project. So changing needles, and that's size, shape, and material. If you are starting on a 6 and go to an 8 accidentally, yes, that will mess with your gauge. You're going to have a much drapier, bigger knit. So don't change needle size mid-project. Don't change needle shape mid-project. Most knitting needles are round, but they do make other shapes. There are square needles, I love them. There are hexagonal needles. There's lots of different shapes. So don't change the knitting needle shape while you are, well into your project. That will change your gauge. The needle material can also change your gauge. Might not, but it could. if you're knitting with bamboo needles and then you switch to a bigger needle or switch to a longer needle or something and it's steel or it's aluminum, that could change, that will add some smoothness and that might make you a looser knitter. So just be wary of that when you are changing needle materials mid-project. Changing knitting styles can also change your gauge. If you swatched English, so if you swatched throwing and then knitted it in continental, that can change your gauge. It might not, but it might. And the last one is your mood. Your mood can absolutely change your gauge. I once made a sweater that was about 2 sizes too small because I was working at lunch at a job I really hated, and I was just angry the whole time I was knitting it. So when it came time to, I was working top down, so when it came time to separate the yoke, and split into sleeves and body, that sweater was way too small. So that was totally my mood on that one. So check your mood, check your needle material, check your needle size, and check your knitting style, English or continental, if you're having gauge issues. Let's talk about measuring so we know what size to make, right? It's important to measure regularly because our bodies change shape over time. While our weight might not change that much, as we, especially women, age, our weight distribution changes a lot. So just measure yourself regularly, or better yet, have a friend measure you, because sometimes when we measure ourselves, we're distorting a bit, so we're not getting the most accurate measurement, which doesn't really help us at all. The most important measurement, I think, is the bust, because that's going to be kind of what tells us what size to make. So we go our biggest point and we measure that. Great. Then we can start considering, I want positive ease, I want negative ease, I don't want any ease. But that's all going to be based off our bust measurement. The next measurement we need to think about, or not, is our waist. A lot of patterns will kind of taper in for the waist. So most people have, a slight difference between their bust and their waist and their kind of hip measurements. Waist shaping is normally optional. I don't do waist shaping for most of my sweaters, but if you want to do it, find your natural waistline, which is going to be different. Remember, the designer has never seen your body, and changes you need to make are for your body. So, all right, here's my waist, because every waist measurement or every waist decrease I've seen in sweater patterns that I've purchased from other people have me starting my waist like up here, and that's not where it is. So know where your waist is, know how much smaller it is, but know where that tapering starts, because you don't want to start tapering unless it's the right point. If your body is tapering, then your sweater should be too. So, you can measure from kind of the armpit and not, cramming your tape measure in your armpit, going, okay, my shirt starts here, I want my sleeve to start around here, measure from there. Okay, I need to measure from here to here. That's where I'm going to start my tapering. I'm going to taper for 2 inches to my smallest point. I'm going to have about 1 inch hovering around that smallest point, and then I'm going to increase back out. Again, this is assuming that you're working from the top down. If you're working from the bottom up, take whatever I just said and go backwards. Again, you don't have to do waist shaping. A lot of times what I do, because I'm pretty pear-shaped, is I will just have a consistent tube for my body until about here, and then I will actually do some increases to buy myself a little more fabric around this part of my body. So you're also going to want to measure your hips. That's not necessarily the biggest point on your hips. That is the measurement where you want your sweater to stop. So that way you have an idea of how much you need to increase if you want to indeed increase. If you don't have that pear-shaped body, then don't worry about that part. But a lot of more feminine shapes do have that kind of pear or that more hourglass figure. And a lot of times increasing back out, following your natural waist, is just a good way to get a more comfortable sweater. Again, have a friend help you if you have one handy. It's a great way to get a more accurate measurement. And a little tidbit, check your tape measure. They get stretched out over time. So every once in a while, find a yardstick or a ruler and, line your tape measure up next to your ruler go, yep, that's accurate, or nope, that's not, then throw it out. Get yourself a new higher quality tape measure. Aside from waist shaping, what are some other modifications we can make to make our sweaters fit us a little bit better? Lots of them. So arms are an easy change to make. So, okay, I don't want a super long sleeve sweater. Just stop when you want to. Not a big deal. Very easy. Shoulders and bust. So this is a great time to incorporate some short rows. So that gives you extra length in some parts of the sweater, but not all of it. So this sweater has some short row shaping in the back, so you can see how low it sits on my front, but it comes up a little higher in the back. So that is made by, we're working in the round, but then before we go all the way around, we're going to stop. We're going to turn our work back this direction, turn again, and then continue on. So that just gave me 2 extra rows in the back, but not the front. So that's a good way to get length in some parts of your body, but not others. Where else can you incorporate short row shaping? If you have a large bust, you can get yourself some extra short rows here. So go here, work your way, work back, and then go and rejoin in the round. So that gives you an extra couple rows right here. And you can add short rows several times. You don't have to have just one short row. So I think this one back here, I think there's 4 short row sequences. So that's an extra 8 rows in the back than there is in the front. So I'm wearing this sweater in particular. It's called Breathing Space. It's a really fun sweater, but the shaping is unusual and it's done entirely by short rows. So you can see that I started here. So I worked all the way in the round. There's stripes going this way. So at the end of one of the stripes, I stopped and I worked a little short row. And then you just go back and pick up an extra few stitches every time, alternating colors. So this is just a great visual example of what short row shaping looks like in process. So places to add that again are shoulders back, and you can add that to the bust. If you could even add it to hips if you wanted to really have some extra fabric right here. That's another place you could sneak in an extra couple short rows. All right, let's do some sweater math. So I have my pattern picked out and it comes in lots of different sizes. I know that my gauge is not what it's supposed to be, so I need to figure out what size I should cast on to get a sweater that fits like I want it to. So let's just say the sweater pattern comes in like 31-inch bust, 33, 35, 37, 39, 41, 43, 45, 47. It just goes up incrementally from there. Cool. The gauge it calls for is, let's say it is 18.5 stitches for 4 inches. That sounds pretty normal for fingering weight yarn or sock weight yarn if you prefer that term. Let's say my gauge or page gauge is 23 stitches per 4 inches. That's right around where I normally hover because I like a nice tight knit. So that doesn't sound like a big difference from 18.5 stitches per 4 inches to 23, but if you think about, that difference, and how many increments of 4 inches go around your body, that's a really big difference. That sweater's not going to fit if I knit the size that I want in the gauge that I'm getting. So what size do I have to make? All right, let's find out by first figuring out how far off I am in my gauge. So let's do 18.5, the gauge I'm supposed to be getting, divided by the gauge that I'm actually getting, and that is 0.084. What does that mean? It means I'm getting 80% of the gauge that I should be. So to get a sweater that fits in the size that I want, I need to knit a size that is about 20% bigger than what I would normally make. So, cool. What do I do with that information? I want to make a size that fits somewhere around like 35 or 37 inches. I know that my gauge is too small, so I think I'm going to have to make one of these sizes, but I have to figure out which one. So let's just spitball it here. So let's start with 43. So let's pretend I'm making, the sweater pattern for the 43-inch bust. And if I want it to fit like, let's see if it'll fit like a 35, which is the final size that I want. I'm just looking at bigger sizes to get, to make up that difference in gauge because my gauge is way too small. So 43, size I'm thinking about making, 35, the fit I actually want, and that is 1.23. Oh, snap, that is 23% bigger. That's just about perfect. Maybe I want just a little more positive ease, just have a slightly baggier, more comfy sweater. I like a good comfy sweater. So let's go for a 37-inch fit. I don't think 45 is going to be quite enough. Let's go for a 47-inch. So 47, so as if we're knitting the stitch count for the 47-inch sweater, divided by 37, and that is 1.27. Okay, you know what? Let's cast on for the 47-inch size to get that 37-inch fit because my gauge is 80% of what it should be. So I want a size that is 20% bigger. It means more knitting, but if I'm happier with the project in the end, that's really all that matters. So how do we check our math on that? What I want you to do is I want you to go ahead in the pattern. Don't cast on yet, read ahead. And I want you to find the stitch count at the biggest point in the sweater. So that's going to be our bust. All right, let's just do some little check ourself math here. So 23 stitches per 4 inches, that's our gauge, remember. And so we'll do 23 divided by 4 because we're trying to figure out how many stitches we're getting per inch because that's going to help us to just double check. So that's 5.75 stitches per inch that I'm getting. Cool, that's good to know. Read ahead in your pattern, find that stitch count for the biggest the biggest point in that 47-inch bust sweater. All right, we're going to see if we're going to get there. So I want it to fit 37 inches, but I'm checking my math for the 47-inch one. So 37 times, so 37-inch bust, 37-inch final fit times 5.75 stitches per inch times 1.27, because that's the size that I'm going to make that's bigger. And that puts us at, I believe, 285-ish. So read ahead in your pattern, and if it gives you a stitch count for what you should have at the bust, it should be somewhere around 285. If you're a few stitches off, that's fine, and that'll work. If it's something, like 340, then hey, we've done our math wrong somewhere, and we need to go back and figure out a different size. So just keep in mind, my gauge is too small. I need to knit something that's bigger and follow the stitch counts, but not necessarily the measurements. If it tells you to do something for 6 inches, don't necessarily follow that. Follow the measurements that you got because you had a friend or you measured yourself and you know how long your waist needs to be before you do shaping, or you know how long your arm needs to be before you start tapering down for that forearm. So don't necessarily follow the inches in the sweater, follow the stitch counts. That's what we're looking for with this math. Now let's talk about, if you are the opposite, if you're a really loose knitter. The gauge calls for 23 stitches per 4 inches, but I get closer to 18.5. So I need to find a smaller sweater size to make up for the fact that I am, knitting 20% bigger than I should be. So you would just kind of do the opposite. So again, it's the size that you should be getting divided by the size that you are getting, or the gauge that you are getting. So, if we have these reversed, then that you would get that at a 1.2, and then you would find a size that is 80% of what you actually want because you're knitting so much bigger than you should be. If you found this presentation helpful, please like and subscribe. You can find more information and some patterns available at my website, paigeshipleydesigns.com, or Paige Shipley Designs on Ravelry. I also have a Facebook page, again, Paige Shipley Designs, and an Instagram page. And again, if you have any questions, shoot me a message. I'm happy to chat with you. I'm happy to do a Zoom class for more information, or I would love to come to your local yarn shop. Just have to ask. Thanks, and have a great day. Happy crafting.